Hi, and welcome to Homegrown Florida. I'm Katrina, and today we are going to be doing something very fun. We are going to be planning out our fall garden. I have always been a big planner, and I think it goes back to my time in the corporate world. I worked in IT, and one of the big things that we did was all these projects, right? So you had to have project management skills in place. And so that required that we would draft out a plan and a schedule for the project. We would put down what our success criteria were. And it was always such a hopeful time because at that point in the project, nothing has gone wrong, which is usually amazing because always something goes wrong. Well, the garden is a lot like that for me. When you start your planning, everything is hopeful, everything is possible, and it's so much fun to get into the planning of the garden. And fall planting is one of the best times of year to grow in Florida. I think it's kind of similar to how northern gardeners feel when spring comes around because that's their big growing season. And here in Florida, fall is our biggest growing season. Everything grows. All the traditional vegetables, even the tropical vegetables, it's crazy. An interesting thing about Florida is that we actually have two warm season crop times that we grow in. So the warm season crops like your corn and your potatoes and things like that will grow in the spring, early winter to spring, and then again in late summer, early fall. And then all through mid fall to late winter, we grow all of our cool season crops. So let's get right into it. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future videos. The first step to planning our fall garden is where we're going to garden. So you may have raised beds, you might have a vertical garden, containers, in ground, whatever it is, you want to start by planning where you're going to put your plants. And so I have 8 foot by 4 foot beds, and then I have 3 green stalks. There's a lot of ways that you can arrange or draw out your plans. A lot of the times I do an electronic version. I use Excel. I break out my old IT days of planning and I get Excel. But this time we're going to do it on paper just because I think this is always a great way for beginner gardeners to start planning out their garden. So what I have here is actually arranged on the table in front of me is my different beds. And so I have 8 beds. So each paper represents 2 beds. So you see the darker square here is an 8 by 4 foot bed. And then I have 2 here and 2 pages here. So a total of 8. And this right here is my awful drawing of my vertical gardens, but I use a green stock gardener, which is a vertical garden that allows you to put water into the top. It normally has 5 tiers, but I only use 4 because I'm super short and I can't reach the watering vessel very well if I have 5 tiers. So I'm only doing 4. Another thing that I do is typically there are 6 pockets that you can grow in, but I never plant the back pocket, so I only put 5 here. So I have 20 pockets that I can grow in for my 3 green stalks that I have. So now that we know where we're going to be growing, now is the fun part of actually putting in what plants we want to grow in what spot. So when you're going to be putting these down, keep in mind that those long season warm and cool season crops are going to need a permanent spot for the season. Now what I'm going to be doing is a square foot gardening plan. along with like a polyculture. So basically what this means is I don't plant things all together. And there's a reason why I don't do that. And that's mainly because I have found that if one plant gets infested with bugs or has a fungal issue, if it's right next to all the other plants in its same like species, it will tend to have a problem over all the plants. But if I spread them out, say for example, I put my tomatoes in the corners of my beds, instead of lined up right next to each other, they tend not to have the same issues. So little tip there. So let's start out with our warm season crops, our long ones, which I'm going to be growing peppers, tomatoes, and winter squash. These tend to be the longest. So like I said, I'm going to put them in separate corners. So I'm going to start with the four corners of this one bed. I'm going to put tomato plants. And then in the corners of the other bed, I'm going to put my peppers. In this bed, I'm going to be focused on my winter squash. So for winter squash, I tend to like them to run along the edge because they are a vining plant, and in this particular bed, I don't have any trellises. But if I run them, if I start a plant here in the corner, I can allow it to run the length of the bed and root along the length of the bed. Now let's work on our cool season crops, the long ones. So I'm going to be doing celery, onions, garlic, and another long season is going to be my Brussels sprouts. This bed has, this one down here, has the most shade, which is what I want because I'm starting those long season cool crops early. I'm starting them in September. So because of that, I need them to be kind of shaded from the intense heat so they don't bolt right away. So down here on the end, I'm going to put all my celeries. And then right next to it, in the shadiest part, I'm going to put my Brussels sprouts. Then what I want to do is have a place for my onions and garlic. I don't mind growing them together because they never tend to have any issues with bugs or fungal issues, and they really, really like full sun. So my beds down here, I'm gonna probably do this half right here is going to be my garlic. And then this half right here, I'm gonna do my onions. So now that we have all our long season warm and cool crops in place, let's start talking about how to put in the shorter season crops, warm and cool altogether. So with corn, for example, I need my trellis system because it does grow tall, but it tends to fall over because of the winds we have here. So I rope off my trellis area and it keeps my corn from falling over. That's this bed here. So I'm going to use this whole bed for corn. And now we're going to put in our short season crops. Something to consider when you're putting these in is succession planting. And I'm going to show you how I schedule and manage my succession planting. So let's talk about lettuce as an example. I'm going to use this bed with the peppers to do my lettuce. But when I plant my lettuce, I'm only going to plant the first 1 to 2 squares. Now we use a lot of lettuce, so I'm going to go ahead and do 2 square foot of loose lettuce to start with. So this first 2 square feet, I'm going to put those lettuce plants in. And you can put like, I think like 4 to 6 plants if you're trying to get them to a non-heading variety. If you want a heading variety, you might want to do as little as 2 to 4. But I do a lot of loose leaf lettuce. So I'm going to put quite a bit densely planted in this particular 2 square feet. Now these other square feet that I have here, 2, 4, 6, I'm not going to plant those right away. What I'm going to do is once I plant these, 1 month later, I'll plant this one, and then the next month, and then the next month. By the time I've gotten to the 4th month here, this batch of lettuce right here is already spent. I've already harvested it, and these 2 square feet are now available. So what will happen is when I get to this 4th month, I rotate back to this 2 square feet right here. And that will allow me to keep planting in the same spot, and I'll have a continuous harvest of lettuce. Now, I do all of my succession planting this way. Always at the beginning of the month. It's easy to remember. The first of the month is when I do my succession planting. Now, if you don't have enough room in your garden to dedicate 3 other spots to be growing in the future, the other way that you can do this is just to dedicate 2 spots. So let's say radishes. So I'm going to grow a radish here and then a radish here. These are going to be my 2 spots for radishes. So what I do is I plant the first spot, and in a month from now, I plant the second spot. On the 3rd and 4th month, I plant my radishes or lettuces in trays, usually a 2 or 3 inch tray rather than the 72 cell trays, because they're much smaller and these things are going to need to live in these trays for a couple extra months. So when I plant this one, I will plant trays as well. And then by the time I start harvesting some of the radishes here, maybe not the whole square foot, but some of the radishes, I will take a plant out of my tray and put it right in the spot where I pulled that radish or that lettuce from. It's always a good idea to have at least 1 tray full of plants that are anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks old, so that way if something else you have planted has not gone well, you always have a plant to put in its place. This is a great pro tip for gardeners out there. Always having a set of plants available in trays allows you to gain successes where maybe it has failed on another type of plant. So always have those trays ready with just some extra seeds and extra plants growing. It may feel kind of like a waste, but I guarantee you there will not be very many plants that you are not planting, because there's always something that doesn't go your way when gardening. So now that we have all of our plants in place, let's talk about dating. Because I'm growing a lot of warm and cool season crops, I have to plan the date of when I'm going to be doing these. And I usually, like I said, start at the beginning of every month. My lettuces, I'm going to start in October. So I'm going to start with a 10/1 date. The other thing that I do when I put my start date is I also put my end date. Not as big of a deal for lettuces, right? But because they grow so fast and you can start harvesting from them probably at like 30 to 45 days for loose leaf. But for things like tomatoes and peppers and winter squash that have long periods of time to grow, I sometimes forget what date I started them, and then sometimes I even forget what date they'll be ending at. So if you put the start and end date for each one down at the beginning, either on your paper that you're doing it, or you can also use the tags to identify your plants and put the start and end dates on the back. This helps me because if I start to see that a tomato plant seems not to be growing very much or growing very slowly, I start to get worried and I convince myself that there's something wrong with the plant, and then I start trying to intervene. Most of the time I'm doing more harm than I am helping the plant in this situation. But if I know that my tomato plants are planted in August and I'm not expecting my first crop until mid to late November, and I see that on my tag or on my spreadsheet, then I know that the plant still has plenty of time to grow and I don't need to intervene. This is going to save you from over fertilizing, losing money, and your sanity. The next step in the process is making sure that you have enough seeds. This is part of my seed catalog. I have a plastic tote behind me that is actually meant for photos, but I use them for seeds, and I'll put a link to Amazon in the description for these if you want to get one yourself. But I need to go through all of my seeds to check 2 things. First, do I have the varieties that I want for fall gardening? And then second, do I have enough seeds in each one? Nothing is worse than going into your seed catalog and getting ready to plant. It's the first of the month and you open up your packet and you've got 2 seeds left in there. And that is not enough for what you wanted to plant. Now you have to go and order seeds, and they take time to ship, and maybe they aren't available, and you're behind. And being behind is an awful feeling, because here, where it gets very hot very quickly, you will lose your plants in no time without thinking a second thought about it. So making sure that you have all the seeds that you need in advance is crucial. But there's another thing to think about beyond just seeds. There's things like your seed potatoes, your garlic cloves or heads, which are also called seed garlic, and then your onion starts. These are things that aren't traditional seeds that you get in little packets, and a lot of the times they're actually harder to find than just regular seeds. My trick to getting those available and bought is to get on 2 or 3 different websites that sell them and put in wish lists, or contact me, or get on their email list, and they'll tell you or give you a heads up via email when they're about to start selling their seed potatoes, seed garlic, or onion starts. Another way to combat that is to try to save some of your harvest from the previous season. I have my seed potatoes over here that I have been allowing to sprout. These are actually from my harvest last spring. And so I've saved these so that I can use them, but I'll also probably be buying a few as well. There have been times in the past where I have attempted to buy them and I could not get them. And so I didn't plant. And that was a huge bummer for me, because I really try to grow all of our own food, or most of our own food. And not having something like potatoes and garlic and onions is crucial to our kitchen, where we use those almost every single day. The next thing to consider is all of the supplies that you need. I like to make sure that I have all of the things that I use for pests in advance. You never want to be dealing with some overwhelming pest issue and then reach into your garden area and find out that you have no more BT or no more neem oil. So make sure that you go through your products. I use a lot of ground cinnamon. I use neem oil very minimally, but I like to buy it at least once a year, because it does tend to go bad. Same with BT and spinoside. I do those as well. The other thing you want to think about is making sure that you have the fertilizers and amendments that you need. So your garden tone is what I use, as well as some blood meal, bone meal, kelp meal. Making sure that you have your 72 count trays, your 36 count trays, your 4 or 5 inch pots, your tags. This may sound like a lot of work, but I can usually sit down and get this done in about an hour or 2. And since it is way too hot to be gardening right now, this is a great way for me to kind of get excited about my fall garden, as well as prepare as best I can for this long season that we have ahead of us. What are some of the ways that you are preparing for your fall garden? What are some of the things I missed? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Head down to the comments and leave me a note. And if you're not sure how many plants you need to feed your family, head to my video here about growing a year's worth of food. This is going to tell you exactly how many plants you need per person to feed your family, specifically a family of 4. This was incredibly helpful for me, so that I wasn't growing too much or too little, and I was taking into account the space that I had in the most efficient way.